What makes Night of the Ninja interesting is that it's one of the episodes in Batman the Animated Series where I most feel the influence of the 70s O'Neill and Adams era Batman. Of course, their influence has permeated every version of the character since, to one extent or another. O'Neill even wrote the first part of the Demon's Quest later in this very series, directly adapting his own work. But the emphasis on Batman's martial arts training feels particularly indicative of this period. At the risk of giving me less to talk about once I get to it, the sequel episode, Day of the Samurai, is even more akin to, as writer Grant Morrison puts it, the hairy-chested globe-trotting adventure of the 70s, because Batman actually goes to Japan there. Otherwise, Night of the Ninja is merely a passable episode, and I think the sequel has a more fun story with this as its foundation, but there are still a few worthwhile elements to consider here. The basic plot is that a ninja is breaking into Wayne Enterprises buildings that turns out to be one of Bruce's fellow martial arts trainees, Kyodai Ken. In the past, under the training of Yoru-sensei, Bruce was never able to defeat the arrogant and dishonorable Kyodai, so once Batman realizes that Kyodai and this ninja in the present are one and the same, Bruce spends much of the episode secretly worried as to whether or not he'll finally be able to beat Kyodai and bring him to justice. Bruce's typically stoic behavior at times makes it difficult to convey the insecurities he keeps to himself, which is why it was pretty smart to include Robin in this episode. He's able to comment to Alfred about Bruce taking this case personally and being more stoic than usual. Dick also gets to learn more about his friend and mentor, as well as where Bruce's weaknesses lie, giving him the chance to make up for them as Robin. This idea is set up in one of the opening scenes where Bruce and Dick spar, and Bruce rather easily hands Dick his own ass. Dick's response, "Sorry, some of us aren't perfect," while reminiscent of some Jason Todd sass, is pretty great because Dick spends a lot of this episode learning the ways in which Bruce isn't perfect either. I also like how Bruce's dedication and drive can hold him back, particularly when he was Yoru-sensei's student. The scene in which he's training by blowing out the candles shows that part of Bruce's discipline comes from a fear of failure. Yoru-sensei spells this out by telling him that failure can be more instructive than victory, but this is still a good lesson for a perfectionist like Bruce to learn. Kyodai is a typical mustache-twirling villain, but at least he's a good example of a person that has not been humbled by, and therefore has never had to learn from, failure. This makes Kyodai complacent in his abilities, while Bruce has only become a better martial artist due to his constant endeavors as Batman, which is why Bruce is able to beat him in hand-to-hand at the end. There's also a nice layer of irony in that Kyodai constantly taunts Bruce as being soft due to his pampered background as a spoiled rich kid, but his arrogance and his own skills have only served to soften himself. After defeating Kyodai at the end, Bruce has seen firsthand that his past failures have made him stronger, and thus can allow himself to loosen up, especially around Robin. It's telling that Bruce refused to thank Dick for saving him from Kyodai in the fight in the middle of the episode, but does so in the closing scene after having overcome his insecurities, which is demonstrated visually with a rather heartwarming image of Bruce, Dick, and Alfred eating together at the dinner table. In hindsight, moments of Bruce and Dick being a unified duo are bittersweet because it doesn't stick, as we'll see in the new adventure season. Moving on, both these Kyodai Ken episodes emphasize the distinction between samurai and ninja, which is a bit amusing when Robin first talks about Kyodai as a samurai, since I'm pretty sure anyone with even a passing knowledge of ninja and samurai could tell the two apart just from how they look. I mean, come on, it's pretty obvious. Anyway, it's interesting that Batman talks about ninja contemptuously as spies and assassins, whose only code is to get the job done. Obviously, Batman has a strict moral code that most ninja don't, but his modus operandi, especially his tendency to use stealth and infiltrate places, is more reminiscent of a ninja rather than a samurai's frontline military approach. Under this lens, it makes sense that in Batman Begins, Bruce is specifically trained as a ninja within the League of Shadows and continues to use their teachings of invisibility and distraction as Batman, but ultimately rejects their extreme utilitarian philosophy. We'll see if this discussion becomes relevant again once we talk about Day of the Samurai. Lastly, I'd like to talk a bit about Summer Gleeson. She's a recurring character that briefly pops up in several episodes, but she also never felt like a real character to me. Night of the Ninja is the episode that features her the most, but I still don't get much of a sense of her beyond that she's a competent reporter that aggressively pursues her stories. The biggest function Summer serves is that she gives viewers a better idea of how the public at large sees Bruce Wayne. She can sense an element of mystery within him, but calls him, quote, the ultimate Boy Scout. This is an element in which Batman the Animated Series differs from most versions of Bruce Wayne. In most continuities, especially the comics and the Nolan trilogy, Bruce is seen as this reckless playboy that spends his money frivolously on women and whatever else catches his eye, while he privately makes sizable donations to good causes. Batman the Animated Series is aimed at a younger audience, so it can't present Bruce as a playboy, so there isn't as sharp a contrast between Bruce's public persona and his Batman persona. At least in the first incarnation of the series. Bruce being the quote ultimate Boy Scout seems to change by the time we're introduced to the New Adventures version of Batman in the Superman crossover World's Finest. In that three-parter, which will be covered in this review series, if I ever get to it, Lois Lane says she's heard that Bruce is, quote, nothing but Gotham trash, and Clark tells him that his reputation is, quote, dubious in and out of costume. Night of the Ninja's approach to Bruce Wayne as a disguise is, coincidentally enough, more along the lines of Christopher Reeve's Superman, where Bruce makes himself seem mild-mannered and pampered so no one will suspect he's actually an extremely skilled crime fighter. Maybe by the time New Adventures roll around, there was less of a push from higher-ups to tone down some of the more suggestive elements like Bruce's playboy reputation, but even if that's not the case, this small change served the world's finest in painting as much of a contrast as possible between Batman and Superman. Okay, now that I veered wildly off track, the last thing I'll say about Summer Gleeson is that she gains nothing from the extra screen time she's given in Night of the Ninja, because the show has to maintain its status quo, and thus she's kept from seeing Bruce beat up Kyodai. Her comments about wanting to know more about Bruce Wayne end up feeling like an unresolved story thread, when the much more interesting option would have been to have her see that Bruce is indeed more than meets the eye. You could argue that this wouldn't properly resolve Robin's arc in the episode when he helps Bruce by making sure Summer can't see what's going on, but I think either Robin could have been given another way to help, or Summer's role in the story should have been given more of a resolution after the fight against Kyodai. As it stands, I do prefer that Dick is given the story resolution over Summer because he actually is an important character in this show. All I'm saying is that if Summer has to be here, then she should be given something more interesting to do. Surprisingly enough, Summer seems most like a defined character to me in the episode Bullet for Bullock, and she has much less screen time there than she does here. Moving on to animation, it seems a bit stiff and lifeless compared to the better-looking episodes in the show, which is a shame considering that this is a martial arts-focused episode, and the fluidity of movement would go a long way towards showcasing Bruce and Kyodai's prowess. Probably the most convincing moment is when Yodo-sensei grabs Kyodai's arm and flips him over. There's a pretty significant change of perspective as Kyodai's body is swung toward and away from camera, and it looks pretty good. Also some convincing sound design here as Yodo makes contact with Kyodai, and Kyodai makes contact with the floor mat. The other thing that looks pretty cool is the design of Kyodai's back tattoo and how emphasized it is in certain moments. Martial arts films are outside my purview, but the dramatic close-ups on the tattoo design feel very reminiscent of those movies. Getting back to the goofier visuals, it's pretty over the top whenever Bruce and Kyodai confront each other, whether it be in the past or the present. They walk around in a circle before lunging at each other. The score in these moments sounds rather cinematic, but it only serves to make it sillier because the exact same music is used each time, and it's begging me to take their super intense struts seriously, and I just can't. Briefly touching on the voice work, Kyodai Ken is voiced by Robert Ito, who has done plenty of work as a character actor in both live action and animation, but unfortunately nothing I've seen myself. He's probably best known as Dr. Shido-sama in X-Files and Professor Ikita in the cult classic The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, which I really need to get around seeing at some point. Regardless, Ito does a very good job conveying Kyodai's arrogance without sounding too over the top. Unfortunately, there isn't much to the role itself, but if I remember correctly, at least Kyodai is part of a more fun plot in Day of the Samurai. I've already talked about him in other episodes, but I want to give a quick shout out to Lauren Lester for his wonderful portrayal of Dick Grayson. He really sells Dick's sense of humor, especially when he does his Batman impression. The energy of scenes seem to pick up whenever he's around and prevents this episode from being a total drag. To sum up, Night of the Ninja is a perfectly fine but also perfectly forgettable episode that can't even benefit from very atmospheric visuals. Its greatest strength is the bond between Batman and Robin, but there are plenty of other more entertaining episodes if you want to see that. I give Night of the Ninja a very lukewarm 3 out of 5. The fact that I constantly reference other Batman-related media goes to show that there just isn't much to say about this particular outing. Nonetheless, the next few videos from me will be more Batman animated series reviews, but I'm curious if any of my viewers would also be interested in hearing me tackle some more comics. I've been considering for a while now reviewing my weekly pull of issues, if nothing else so I can talk about Tom King's Batman run, because I think it's been brilliant so far. Either way, thank you all for your continued support. It's truly amazing. So, next time we'll be taking a look at a not so perfect episode, Cat Scratch Fever. See you in the next year!